Thereafter, we set about trying to put together a defense of this case. And we knew we were up against it because, everything that we needed reasonably to defend this case was back in England. And by virtue of the fact that we were in America, we had no rights of subpoena over any of that. Now, a lot of people have said, well, why didn't you just get this stuff? You were waiting in England to be extradited for 2 years. Why didn't you get all this stuff and get all these witnesses then? And the answer was we couldn't. We had no legal rights. There were no legal proceedings in the UK. Nobody'd sued us. There were no criminal charges against us. And unless you're involved in a legal action, you have no rights. So we knew all this stuff was there, but we had no right to get it, even when we were in the UK. Now, if somebody had sued us in the UK, or if somebody had brought charges against us in the UK, fine, we could have got all that stuff. There were never any charges, we were never sued. So we end up in Texas, and we know that everything that we need is in London. So we've got to start the process of trying to get hold of this stuff. And we failed miserably, we never came close. We couldn't get witnesses, we couldn't get the materials. All the motions got denied or not ruled on or whatever. But the first thing that we set about doing was to get the indictment dismissed. And by and large, the motion that was put together, which was, mostly by Gary's firm in Washington, it was an astonishing motion to dismiss. And I thought that the judge would have to accept it because it was just so strong. And one of the strongest parts of it was that the US government used the federal wire fraud statutes to bring us here. And the wire fraud statutes basically enable them to criminalize any kind of sort of underlying conspiracy or ill-doing where there have been electronic communications, which could be faxes, emails, telephone calls, or whatever, across a state line. There you go. That's a wire fraud. And so, notwithstanding the fact that all the overt acts and everything else, that we're supposed to have defrauded our bank in London, because there had been faxes and or emails backwards and forwards to the US, that gave them jurisdiction, or so they said. Now, there is some very strong precedent in wire fraud in particular, through a case called McNally, that suggests that you can't just forever expand the extraterritorial reach of US statutes. McNally says, look, US statutes are presumed to be about the United States. And if you want to go about expanding the jurisdiction of those statutes, you better have a jolly good reason to be able to do that. And there was no way on earth, if you looked at the construction of the charges against us, what they were criminalizing effectively was a breach of our fiduciary duty to our employer in London. So we were foreign defendants accused of conduct in a foreign country relative to our employer under an employment contract. And what they were effectively trying to do was to use the wire fraud statutes to criminalize that behavior. And any sensible analysis of the law, I think, would come to the conclusion that you just can't do that. I'm real sorry, but that's not what the wire fraud statutes were there for. And I believe very strongly that that motion to dismiss was as close to bulletproof as you could get. And it ought to have resulted in the charges against us being dismissed. And bizarrely, notwithstanding the fact that it was done on a very technical basis, the underlying argument there was exactly the same one that we had used to try not to get extradited in the first place, which is, what the hell are you doing trying this case? This case, if it belongs anywhere, belongs in London. And any common sense view, I've talked to thousands of people, professionals, media people, friends, family, over time. Everybody but everybody, my 8-year-old daughter at the time, said, this is really silly, Daddy. Why don't they try the case in England? She's 8. She gets it. Why the hell doesn't the US or the UK government get it? Well, so that was the argument. And it was a very technical argument to do with the wire fraud statutes. But the common sense, step back, look at the big picture argument was, this is nuts. What the hell are we doing? this belongs in London, sod off. And I believe that there are a few judges here in Houston who would have looked at it and said, yep, you're absolutely right. Thank you very much. Go home, boys. If the UK want to try you for this, that's their business. But we have no business bringing this case in Houston.